Next week it's.
I don't know. We'll be happy. Oh, we-
Maybe not.
He's at the governor's speech.
Great, it's 7:30. I'm going to call to order this regular council meeting for the Middleton Common Council. It's February 18th, 7:30. Could I have assistance with the roll call, please?
Yes, Alder Schaefer.
Here.
Alder Madden.
Here.
Alder Kalish.
Here.
Council President Nelson.
Here.
Alder Jackson.
Here.
Alder Hanairo.
Here.
Alder Lorman.
Here.
Alder Crow.
Here.
Mayor Kuhn is absent and excused.
Thank you. Instead of going right to the public comments, I'd like to move, without objection, I'd like to move the public hearing up to our next item. It is still 7:30. Item number 1, Middleton Vitruvius, doing business as Vitruvius, is requesting a Class B fermented malt beverage and Class C wine license located at 7429 Elmwood Avenue, Middleton, Wisconsin, with Hamid Nugani, 1 Prairie Hill Court, Madison, as the agent. Is there anyone here to speak? Is there anyone here who would like to speak? Is there anyone who would like to speak? Hearing none, I will close this public hearing. Moving on to public comments. Reminder that you get 3 minutes, and if you could say your name and address. Our first speaker is Kevin Spittler.
Good evening. Is this on? I'm Kevin Spittler. I live at 6848 Frank Lloyd Wright Avenue in Middleton. I've been encouraging the city to apply the guidelines in the baseline sustainable purchasing policy since it was passed in April 2023. So I'm pleased to see that the implementation plan is finally back before the council for final approval tonight. It's been coordinated with numerous city departments, committees, and commissions, primarily by Middleton's Sustainability Committee Vice Chair Laura Buchholz. Laura has also devoted countless hours to leading the effort to research, draft, and continually revise much of the IP. Apparently, it's now on version 6. Once it is approved, collectively, we must ensure that the IP is put into practice, including the provisions that assign the responsibilities to the city administrator, department directors, and which require training of and reporting by city staff. So please approve miscellaneous item number 4, because it will provide a process and online tools that guide upfront consideration of cleaner energy options for city facilities, vehicles, and equipment, including a life cycle cost estimate that should permit new cleaner energy options to favorably compete against conventional fossil energy choices, particularly when the out-year costs are considered. Thank you for this opportunity to address the council and for your commitment to our city.
Thank you, Kevin. Is there anyone else who would like to comment tonight? Is there anyone online? All right, I'm going to close the public comments. On to the approval of consent agenda.
I would like, I move to remove rec desk payments agreement from the consent agenda.
Item 4.
Yep. And if there are no other removals, then I move approval of the consent agenda minus item 4.
Do I have a second?
Lorman will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, items number 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. signify, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. On to consent agenda item number 4.
Madam Chair, I move that we postpone the rec desk payments agreement action until our March 4th meeting.
Do I have a second?
Lorman will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Just Finance and Personnel Committee felt like we needed more information on some of the fees, so we're going to get that information, we hope.
Anything else? All right, voting on whether to move the rec desk payments agreement to our March meeting, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. On to miscellaneous, number 1, snowplow artwork and naming contest. Does anyone have a motion?
No, this is Madden. I'll move approval of the snowplow artwork and naming contest as recommended by the Public Works Commission.
Do I have a second?
This is Jackson. I'll second.
All right. I need some discussion.
Because it's art.
No, I'm just curious. Can you tell me how this came about?
Well, I'll talk. We chatted about it in Public Works at our past meeting and talked about how we can best involve the community in naming the snowplow. Lots of other communities have done similar things, and what is the best way to potentially come up with the naming of the snowplow and how to get particularly kids involved as well as the community. And so the kind of compromise solution that we came up with as a committee was to say, okay, well, let's leave it to the elementary school kids. The elementary school kids will then choose, like among their cohorts, what each school's entry will be. And then the public at large then can choose which of the pieces of art generated by the elementary school kids gets to be painted on the plow. And then it gets to be in the Good Neighbor Parade, which would be
That's pretty cool.
amazing.
What
So,
material, what kind of paint are you using on the blade?
we didn't touch on that a ton, although I'll be honest with you, I don't think any of us expect that after that initial painting that the blade paint will remain on.
So I'm assuming it's going to be painted in August and not,
Yes,
okay.
yes,
This is on the blade, not on the doors.
correct.
Ooh.
Well, it's like this winter, it'll last for a couple of years.
Yeah, right. Poor Snowy McSnowplow won't get very much action, so maybe the paint will stay, but we'll see.
Any other discussion? I know that Big Lebowski is a name that's already taken because I think Madison took that one for one of their plows.
I just think this is a great idea, something that it's, as Alder Madden mentioned, other communities have done. And you all took that simple idea and ran with it. So I think this is a really great idea to engage the community and especially the kids.
Excellent.
I'm excited to see the entries.
Great ideas. Anybody else? If no other discussion, all in favor of approving the snowplow artwork and naming contest, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Miscellaneous number 2, consideration for appointment of an acting director of Parks and Recreation and temporary approval of additional compensation.
This is Haniro. I move to appoint Laura Gessling as acting director of Parks and Recreation during the family medical leave of Kylie Scherer, and that we apply a 6% acting increase to Ms. Gessling and a 4% increase to Kevin Short during Kylie's absence.
Lorman will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? Only that we wish Kelly the best. All right. If there's no other discussion, all in favor of appointing Laura Gessling as acting director of Parks and Recreation and for approving the 6% increase to Laura Gessling and a 4% increase to Kevin Short, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. On to miscellaneous number 3, potential action on selection of a consulting firm to conduct the city's combined classification and compensation and organizational and operational study.
Madam Chair, this is Sonairo, as recommended by the Finance and Personnel Committee. I move to select Baker Tilly to conduct the city's combined classification and compensation, organizational and operational study in an amount not to exceed $107,400 with money coming from the 2024 general fund carryover.
Thorman will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? Any questions? Hearing none. All in favor of choosing Baker Tilly for being the consulting firm to conduct the city's combined classification, compensation, organizational, and operational study not to exceed $107,400, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. On to miscellaneous number 4, approval of sustainable purchasing policy implementation plan.
Schaefer moves approval.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Sonairo will second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
I have some questions.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. The couch too.
You have questions too?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, so in the summary sheet, it sounds like they want the council to define major and minor purchases, set trigger thresholds, consider the creation of a transition fund. So are we considering that as well as part
Yes.
of this? Do we need to have a discussion about what those are? Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
And just before we get into that discussion, I just want to acknowledge and thank all of the staff, the committee members, members of the public that have worked on this. And when this plan came before this council several months ago, I think I mentioned this is one of the best plans I've ever seen. And then this complements it. So this is a colossal amount of work. So thanks to everybody that is committed to this so far.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Alder Nairo?
I concur with my colleague. I had a couple of questions. I don't know if Kelly can answer or is Laura's online? Okay. Can we make sure Laura is unmuted and on? It would be good to still see the what we're looking at. But one of the things I was going to suggest is to identify all units within the city to whom this applies, because I know sometimes it's not clear. Is the golf course a city facility? Is the airport a city facility? And so I think somewhere it should state specifically who's bound by this. I had some questions about the e-procurement system, and I wondered if there would be any benefits to centralizing our procurement and maybe even hiring a procurement specialist, perhaps in addition to an e-procurement system. And I don't know if Laura has an opinion on that.
Do you want me to, I'm online, do you want me to comment now?
Yes, please.
Okay. In terms of the e-procurement system, I think that it is a good idea if it is something that we can afford. However, I think you can make a lot of progress without it. We didn't find that there would be a lot of savings in terms of centralizing things like, bulk purchasing. So that didn't seem to be like a big area for savings. But in terms of streamlining the system, making RFPs easier, organizing everything into one space where all the different units could use the same tool and everything would be in one place, that would be a great benefit. I did not do a cost analysis to determine the price point, but if it was part of a system to manage the city as a whole, then I think it would be well worth it and would help move us forward. It'd make tracking things easier.
Okay, thank you for that. with regard to buildings, and I'm referencing page 179 of the packet, it says all proposed new buildings require an energy efficiency review. And I just wonder if you can walk us through what that means. And I'm thinking specifically of the building at the golf course as an example, how that, what would have happened with that particular proposal if we required an energy efficiency review?
Yes, that's part of where it came from. This was, I think, a comment from, might have been Public Works Committee, or it might have been Parks and Rec. I can't remember exactly. But the idea is to do the review at the beginning. Part of what happened with the golf course maintenance building is that the thought of sustainability kind of came at the end of the project as opposed to the beginning. And if the engineers had been required to do an energy efficiency review to say this is how much could be saved, then it would have been built in from the beginning. So the idea is let's look at it at the beginning as opposed to what happened at the golf course where it kind of came in later, where it's like, hey, this is not well insulated. It's not, set up to be super energy efficient. And as we know, that was caused some difficulty.
Okay, thank you for that. And does this relate at all to our sustainable building guidelines? Is that something that you can
The
talk?
sustainable building guidelines are, they're in process, but yes, that would be another thing that would be part of it. We haven't really, as a committee, started working on that, but I know Slipstream is working on that. We're talking about putting them together. That's the next project. So yes, having an energy efficiency review, all big buildings are, those are major purchases. So the idea is to see just what we're saving up front. What are they estimating?
Okay, thank you. On page 180 regarding concrete, using, greener concrete and soliciting bids on projects using the greener concrete. Do we need more information and education on this, or is this something that it's like flipping a switch? We just need to specify it in the bid documents.
There's a couple things that are a little bit complicated about it. We talked to one of the feedback that I got from, I think it was the assistant city engineer, was that requesting specific mixes were kind of small, and that it would help if the big boys were doing it, like Madison and Dane County and things like that. But we don't know for sure how difficult it is, because we're not asking them to make it more. We're not asking, in some ways, we're almost asking them to, not over engineer the mix. So you don't need the same mix for a sidewalk as you might need for a street, something like that. So it is something that on one level, if you just change the language and the providers have it and can mix it, it's not a problem. If it's a problem where, well, we can't get that mix because we're too small of an order, then we need to start coordinating with the county and with Madison to try and increase the regional demand for the product.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Can the county help us with that? But it sounds like that's already on your radar. And then finally, in terms of questions, I know we still need to discuss the items the committee requested input on. Bottled water. We offer bottled water here too. And I'm just wondering, how can we do that differently? And I asked that because I used to, in my career, I worked with the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus. And of course, drinking water in the Great Lakes region, it's all Great Lakes water. So we were adamant about any hotel contract where we were going to have a meeting and there'd be refreshments, no bottled water. We just wanted pitchers or a cooler, no bottled water. And I'm wondering, what are some options for us? Because we do have, maybe guests are coming for something and we want to be able to help them hydrate. So what can we do instead?
Well, we haven't put anything specifically in there regarding bottled water. That kind of falls under the single use. If you look at the 5-year plan, the single use stuff came a little bit later, and that came from mainly things like from the EMS medical waste. They're like, well, there's some things that are just single use we can't do anything about except track and see if there's better ways we can dispose of it. And so since single use, I mean, clearly we would like to eliminate single use utensils and, things like that. But since we were going, I guess, for the big impact, energy and climate related items, we did not focus in on that. I mean, I could add some guidance, but it does come later in the plan.
Right. I was going to say there is actually a standard in there for special attention being given to reducing the purchase of styrofoam projects and bottled water. And so I thought I would bring it up as something that maybe I agree that the bigger impact items should come first. At the same time, though, it's probably the case that some of the smaller impact things will be fairly easy to implement, like just not buying bottled water anymore. So I think there should be some flexibility as the staff are implementing this to, maybe take on not as a substitute for, they should be focusing on the big things. But if there are some of the smaller, farther out things that can be accomplished today, why not do them?
Yeah, there's nothing preventing that. In fact, originally I had a 3-year plan and then bumped it out to 5 because there was concern that it would be too much too soon and difficult to implement. So anything can be addressed earlier. We just tried to make it reasonable, especially for staff that or departments that this might affect a lot. So it was a matter of trying to manage what the staff could actually handle.
Thank you.
Alder Kalish.
Yeah, just one more question before we get into those 3 other items. So, one of the things I really like about this plan is it's holistic. I mean, it covers everything from office materials to vehicles to to contracts to requests for proposals and requests for qualifications. Just one question on page 15 that addresses the request for proposals, quotes, and bids. And this is one aspect I really like about it, is that we're going to start evaluating criteria, or part of the criteria we use to evaluate proposals and bids that the city gets will be sustainability. But one question I have is on towards the end of page 15, is it says ask the vendors to submit one or more following pages. The vendor's response should be weighted between 1% and 5% of the overall proposal evaluation. In my biased opinion, I think it should potentially be more. I mean, it's not obviously a deal killer for me, but was there any consideration for that percentage? The 1 to 5, and why wasn't it considered 1 to 10, 1 to 20?
I think part of it was, first of all, let's get started and see where we're at. Even when we met with the Cement Council when we're trying to learn about the different cement mixes, they said simply asking for these sustainability documents and things like that would help them to start, competing. Some of the feedback that I got from our staff was that since a lot of our suppliers, they may not have these sustainability plans, and they were afraid that if we required them, that it might reduce bids. And so we thought, well, maybe we should be careful here. You don't want to have contractors not bid, give them time to adjust, realize that it's important, and then leave it up to the department staff leader to determine how much we're going to do. And in that discussion, if I recall, they were concerned. They're like, we're going to have to state everything in the RFP. You can't, do it after. There's certain things that are required by law. So the 1 to 5 was a starting position that seemed reasonable, that was higher than 0, but not so high that it might make it really difficult. And so we were just trying to, I guess, kind of shoot the gap of between getting started and making it too arduous and reducing bits and things like that.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Alder Schaefer.
Yeah, I just want to comment on Laura. I think you said it very well. This is a starting position. We've worked on this for a couple of years and it's a huge amount of work and it's a start. And we've never had one of these before. And so clearly we're going to succeed. Some places we're going to fail, some places, but I see it as work in progress. And if we start to nickel and dime it for it just doesn't happen. I think we've made a big mistake. So I'm still advocate that these are all good ideas you're talking about. And I will take that back to the committee and work on these things, but I don't want that to somehow stall this process right now.
Yeah, I would like to comment that this is such a brilliant tool that we now have at our fingertips. And I do hope and I'd like to predict that this will be some sort of an award-winning tool for other cities to try and do as well as we did. But I also see that as we are on version 6, I see this as sort of a document that will be updated and be a living document, if you will, because we'll perfect how we want to do things. And I just think this will be so helpful in streamlining our process. Anybody else have any comments? All right. Laura, do you have anything else you need to add?
No, just the only thing the slide that's up now, really the things that I could not determine were, things like if we're going to require this IP checklist for major purchases, we need to define a major purchase and we need to state when that IP checklist is to be provided. Is it straight to council, finance committee, the department committee, things like that. So all that's left are things that we can't do we can't determine to get started. So I guess that's all we need to do is discuss it and you guys can make some choices.
Do we need to make any of those decisions this evening?
So I would say so, because isn't our goal to make sure that this is done in time for it to possibly be reflected in proposals or in budget requests for 2026?
Yes, it is meant to be used with the budget requests and especially major purchases. So even if you don't have a trigger mechanism, by at least defining, well, is a major purchase everything that's over 5,000 or is it everything that's over 25,000? That will help staff to know, all right, I have to use this at this point. And then all else would be a minor purchase. But then it's like, okay, how much leeway do we have for minor purchases? And that's when I tried to type out in blue a couple of examples, one or the other or both would get cut. What's the trigger mechanism? How much leeway for a minor purchase does staff have if the more sustainable option is more expensive than the cheapest? If you choose $5,000, then you're giving them about $1,000 leeway. If you go with 20%, if you make it 25,000 and 20%, that's about a $5,000 leeway. So that doesn't necessarily mean that if they thought it was a really good purchase, it's over. It's just, all right, you got to go back to council to see if you can make this purchase. One of the concerns by staff was, well, if we have to justify every single little purchase, how much staff time is that going to take? And are we losing money by making them justify every little purchase? So they kind of got to know what's a major purchase and what's a minor purchase.
Thank you. Alder Lorman.
Yeah, so a question along that same line. Thinking outside the dollar box on this, there are things that the city uses that don't cost a lot of money, but have a higher environmental impact that might, say, internal combustion power tools, which there's a lot of them and they're small and they don't cost a lot of money, right? And not to get in the weeds of that, but then you are dealing with, say, the maintenance, the staff that have to maintain that equipment, just literally fix it, right? Or run it till it wears out. So, where can we say, look, we don't want to sit here and say, no, you can't buy that two-stroke weed whacker trimmer, and it costs $250, right? But it has a high environmental impact because of its pollution. So, I just think I'm just saying, I want to allow the city staff to know, hey, do the right thing from a sustainability standpoint, but we can't sit here and go down line item by line item and those kinds of things. That's it. Thanks.
Alder Gollish.
Yeah, and I just wanted to reiterate what Alder Schaefer said too, is, this is going to be an iterative process, right? So we're going to learn and apply what we learn as we go along. And so, we may not need to get everything exactly perfect, this first go around, I'm thinking, but what Alder Lorman said really rings true too. They, in terms of the major purchase numbers, what would make sense to me would be basing it off of some sort of foundational framework that we already have. This is so, like, I think the reason that 5 and 25,000 were thrown out there is that there's already a process for those benchmarks. For construction, it's in statute, and I work with this too in a different realm, but in statute, it says any construction project over 25,000, you have to put out for bids. Any project in between 5 and 25,000, you have to do another process. So, are there benchmarks like that where there's a number that you already have to do something in addition, so that we could build off of that and use that in this process? I'm asking, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that's why 5 and 25 are thrown out there, because those are already identified as a foundational benchmark for more arduous or more additional review. But
that is where the numbers came from. I pulled them from the statute from the building codes. So you're correct.
Alder Naira.
I would agree that it makes sense to use those for that reason, since these are already thresholds that the staff know about. So
Alder Schaefer.
Yeah, I agree with this, but then if you need something between 5 and 25, you need an additional mechanism that we also don't have defined here is, who and what takes an extra look and makes the decision if it's under 25 but over 5.
I thought about that, but then I had major, minor, moderate, and then it was getting too complicated really fast. And so I thought, okay, maybe we do it simple to get started, pick one or the other. But I had that all written up, and if you chose, I could easily have, major, moderate, and minor purchases that perfectly align with the statute that's written.
Alder Schaefer.
Yeah, I would, given that information, I would shoot for a low number. And maybe it will bog things down a little bit, and that can be changed over time. But as Alder Lorman said, we were talking about a lawnmower that was $22,000. That fits under a small purchase, and suddenly, it's a major gas-driven riding lawnmower. So there's a lot of stuff under 25,000 that gets purchased by this city. So, I would look at saying 5,000, and then if that really screws things up and starts, bog down the wheels, then we can always amend it and change it.
Conversely, I was wondering how problematic it would be to have anything under 25,000 be categorized as a minor purchase.
I thought we were coming up with 25,000 for major purchase, and anything under 5,000
minor.
is minor, and that would capture the
Yeah, it
scenario
leaves it
that
sort of
Alder
Yeah.
Lorman.
vague in the middle, but it requires somebody to say, okay, what do we do here?
Right.
It's a $12,000 purchase. What do we do?
Well, and if I may,
Yeah.
you know, the idea is, to me, once this is passed and the administrator works with the staff to make sure it gets implemented, starting with this year's budget requests, all the departments have to show up for the budget meetings. And that is the Finance and Personnel Committee's opportunity to reinforce that, you know, just because your purchase may fall within this, you know, 5 to 25,000 amount, doesn't mean this doesn't apply. I mean, we're sending a message by adopting this implementation plan that we're serious about this. We want to see this happen, and the, you know, the maxim being sustainability is the default. That, to me, is something we carry forward in all our conversations with the department chair or department heads.
So am I hearing that council is interested in having a moderate purchase category? Is that what I'm?
I think that
Alder Lorman, go ahead, sorry.
Oh,
Alder
No, I
Lorman.
guess what I'm saying is, I'm okay with the thresholds that, the way they're put, and I just think as long as it's very clear that, you know, this responsibility is on city staff. We're saying, this is fine, move forward with sustainability purchasing. And it's gonna be really incumbent on city staff to train and work with the people who are responsible for those purchases. You know, say, well, I want to buy a gas trimmer. No, it should be electric, right? And let them work that out.
Yeah.
I mean, and if there's a rationale for going with one versus another, you know, again, we stay out of it. And we just let it play out, because it's like any policy that's implemented. Brian.
I ask a logistics question, Brian. So if we clarify this, say a major purchase is 25,000 or above, minor purchase is 5,000 or below, does that have to change the amendment? That's not what's in the original document. How do we, because we have a motion on the table. Second.
I mean, once you've, generally speaking, have answered the questions that Laura's looking for, then you can make a substitute motion or amendment to the original motion to add your definitions to that. Then Laura will take the time to update the document with those changes, and then we'll distribute that to department heads and other staff that need to know it. Just an item I wanted to touch on that Alder Lorman mentioned, those thresholds are fine, with the caveat that then there needs to be kind of a fast track on what the training is, so that staff who are making kind of this initial cut of, you know, review of these items, the, you know, the electric versus the ICE versions of the equipment, kind of know how to utilize all the different tools and things that are in this document, so that they feel like they know what's being asked of them. I think that if there was one kind of question among staff as we were going through this process, it's one thing to write these things on paper and say this is the policy, but it's understanding what it means when we're actually trying to go through it when you're making a purchasing decision. So I think these categories are fine if we can have some training for staff so they can understand what the expectation is from council when they're going through this process. Because that's what I've heard.
Absolutely. That's kind of the root of what I'm getting at is,
But so it seems to me that we're getting clear on what we want, but we don't need to define these two rules or two numbers to go ahead and approve the document. We can add to that and find out some information, get some things, and then add that onto the document.
Sorry, point of information. I think you should do it tonight. You know, if you are leaning towards this 3-piece, do that now so that it can be incorporated in to the document before it gets sent to staff, because that's going to be
That requires an alternative motion or
an amendment to the motion.
I would offer amendment motion to define 25,000 and above as a major purchase, 5,000 below as a minor purchase.
So the amendment offered to the main motion is to define major purchase as $25,000 or above, and minor purchase as less than $5,000.
Less than, yeah.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion on that? Are we voting on that first then, Brian?
Is that helpful to you, Brian?
I think so, because that'll be the question that's asked is, at what threshold?
Yeah.
At what threshold does this purchase fall in the category where we need to utilize the tools in the document? So I think at least having that information would be helpful for staff.
Okay, thanks.
And just to be clear, it's greater than,
Greater than 25 or
And-
less than or equal to 5,000.
I just want to make sure that's in the motion.
Great. All in favor of the amendment to define major purchase as greater than 25,000 and to define minor purchase as anything under
Equal or below.
equal or less than $5,000, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Amendment passes. Do we have to go on to define other, these trigger mechanisms, et cetera?
I think so.
Only if Laura thinks it's necessary, based upon the conversations with the other committees.
Well, the discussion that I had is they're like, how much for like a minor purchase, how much room do we have to go over? If it's not the cheapest option? They're like, if it's the cheapest option, that's easy. What about when it's not the cheapest option? And so the 20% came from, that's what Milwaukee County uses. And at $5,000, that would be a max of, if you went with 20%, 1,000. So for example, if some piece of equipment costs exactly $5,000 for gas and $6,000 for electric, then they would be able to purchase the $6,000 one without seeking further approval. If it was, $6,500, then the way it's written currently is to send it back to council if they really want it. Is this enough? Can we go over that trigger mechanism or not? And so if you establish that, that will help staff to know how much leeway it can be. So whatever you determine, what percent.
Right, so my point being is that the 5,000 is the limit. That's it, not 5,100. So if internal combustion is 4,900 and sustainable is 5,000, great. We have to work within these parameters. This way, staff isn't overburdened. So we're giving staff the leeway to simply work it out within the thresholds we've established. So we're not getting stuck looking at something that's $5,100.
So if it's $5,100, it comes back to us.
No,
It goes to
We're just
whatever
saying to
mechanism we
staff,
put together.
we're
The
just,
way you deal with staff works out what
yeah,
goes on between.
I'm
them.
just saying to staff, figure it out. We're giving you a budget, a threshold, and just work with it, and that's it. Because if it's always going to come down to, if we learn that, well, 5,000 simply is not enough and everything out there is 5,500, then maybe we have to revisit that in the future. But just to get this thing started, I'm saying, my gosh, you got to be able to buy a weed trimmer for $250 versus $375. So make your purchases and work within that scope. If it's getting, when we get up to that level, it'll be a learning experience.
Okay, I'm going to have Alder Kroll go first and then Alder Herniro.
And I guess this is directed toward Bill. How does that work with budgeting if there's, the amount of the threshold that we agree to? Is that going to throw things out of whack budget wise if all of a sudden we're adding 20% to everything we purchase? How does that work for you, I guess, and for the city budget?
Yeah, I have not gone through and done an analysis out of everything we purchase and what would 20% additional cost impact be. I think for some of this, we'll have to pick a threshold and get started and kind of evaluate and then reassess as we go forward. Yeah, I do think in terms of the thresholds that the 25,000 and 5,000 do make some sense, both for the bidding threshold at 25,000, and we have a minimum $5,000 threshold for items to be considered capitalized. So I think that's a good starting point. 20% may be reasonable, but I think we would want to get feedback from departments that are purchasing a lot of the equipment, especially the smaller equipment, and see what their feedback is on that percentage.
But there would be room to basically spend more on things if we needed to.
Yeah, I think there'll be some. I think as we go into the next budget, that it'd be helpful if staff have these guidelines and as part of their budget narratives, especially for those larger ticket items that would be in the capital budget, they could identify, these would be the cost. This is the cost to go with the more expensive but more sustainable option, and then we can evaluate that as we go through the budget process.
Yeah, and I realize too that there's long-term savings.
Mhm.
Even if there's upfront
Alder
costs are a little
Hernandez.
bit more. So I get that too, but I'm thinking of kind of the yearly budget and
Yeah, and I think we've seen already in the last couple budgets that there have been some examples of, for at least vehicle purchases or equipment purchases, purchasing a more expensive option if it is a hybrid, or in some cases we've done electric,
Yeah.
and we've built that into the vehicle replacement plan. So that's something that if that's a policy priority for the city, we can allocate the funds during budget time to do that.
okay.
Thank you. This was a really good question about the budget, and I too see this as more the case that when we get the budget requests, it's already built in to have these extra expenditures. So that means we're going to be maybe funding fewer projects if it turns out that the bigger ticket items are going to cost more. Regarding the threshold, I'll give you an example. I don't know if I guess we approved this in the consent agenda, or no, it's the Baker Tilly, CNC and O&O report. It's a very long acronym, almost as long as water resources. But that one, we didn't take the lowest bid. We went 21% higher to go with Baker Tilly because there was some value to us in doing that. They know us, they've got a lot of experience. So we didn't just accept the lowest bid. We had other decision-making points that we brought into that. And I see this as similar. If our goal, if our policy is we need to get to 100% renewable energy and just reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, there's a price you pay for doing that. And this is what that 20%, I think a 20% threshold is a good amount. And so I would move that we establish a threshold of 20%.
Okay, so this is another amendment.
Yep.
Okay, do I have a second?
Also saying.
Thank you. Any further discussion on that, the amendment? Hearing,
I wanted to clarify one thing about, I guess it's numbers in general. The life cycle cost is really, really important for us to understand when we're comparing an EV to a standard, internal combustion engine vehicle. We need to be looking at the lifetime cost of that vehicle to the city, not just the purchase price, because the purchase price, for now at least, is always going to be less for the ICE vehicle than for a similar EV. And so that's why it's really important to underscore throughout this document that life cycle is what we are focused on when it comes to these major purchases. I just want to make that clear.
all right, anything else? All right, voting on the amendment to approve the trigger mechanism at 20%, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That amendment passes. I don't have the form in front of me. Were there other definitions that we needed to put in place?
Madam Chair. The third item was to establish a fund. Common Council needs to create and approve a transition fund. I believe we already have a fund that may be usable for that. So I don't know if we need to make a formal motion to pursue that, or if that's something that staff can do and bring back to us some ideas for what a transition fund could look like. Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, we do have some funds that are part of the capital carryovers. I think that we could bring back some ideas of how you could have a fund with different sources, whether it be capital or general fund carryover or others. So I think that's something we can work on some options and bring that back for you.
Okay. And I'm mindful of the instruction not to have motions that express the council's desire to do something. So I think we could go forward with just the two amendments, the two numbers that we came up with, and recognize that the idea of setting up a transition fund is something that we can pursue outside of this approval.
Great. And do we need to deal with formal purchasing hierarchy this evening?
Is that in the memo?
The request.
That seems more process than document, and it seems like that's something that should come after the document is approved. Okay, how do we implement it? And that's the process that gets put in place. So I would say we don't act on that at this.
Alder Crowe.
And I guess is some of that written into the policy as it is about,
Agreed.
it goes to council, if the amount is triggers something else, or if there's, so I think some of that is already there.
Right. Great. So are we ready to vote on the initial motion to approve the Sustainable Purchasing Policy Implementation Plan
Madam Chair, the original motion as amended.
as amended? All right. All in favor of approving the Sustainable Purchasing Policy Implementation Plan as amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Laura, for all of your information and your amazing work. Yeah, that was really great. All right, moving on to ordinances, second reading. Number 1, an ordinance to create a pedestrian mall over a portion of Lake Street. Do I have a motion?
Schaefer moves.
House will second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of creating a pedestrian mall over a portion of Lake Street, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. On to resolutions. Resolution 2513, amending the 2025 approved water utility budget for the Franklin Avenue reconstruction project. Do you need me to read that resolution? Okay.
This is an IRO. I move approval of the resolution as recommended by the Finance and Personnel Committee.
Thorman will second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of approving Resolution 2025-13, amending the 2025 approved water utility budget for the Franklin Avenue reconstruction project, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. On to discussion. Any updates on committees, commissions, and boards? Does anyone have anything? Alder Nairo?
I have a couple. First, Workforce Housing and CDA held a joint meeting. Dr. Nelson was there. I'm very excited. We will have a resolution to council for passage at our April 15th meeting. And we're going to have a joint meeting again on March 13th to discuss how we can organize into groups. And I need to work with Matt to identify limitations and get guidelines for doing this in a way that's effective, efficient, and within the constraints of Wisconsin open meetings law. And then second, the DCCVA is going to have its next meeting in person at the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District on March 12th at 5. We talked today about possible speakers. We're hoping to get somebody who could give us an update on federal funding. Ideally a lobbyist who might know a little bit more about what we can expect when it comes to what's safe, what isn't, and what, if anything, municipalities can do to try to preserve our funding. If we can't get a speaker to do that, the other option is immigration, specifically what obligations do municipalities face and what rights do we have as local governments? And then finally on DCCVA, the Stam House was suggested for the annual membership meeting on May 14th. But the staff for DCCVA haven't heard back from them. So they're looking into other options too, including Cottage Grove, Cross Plains, and Wanakee. So, but please try to attend the March 12th meeting to see a good presentation on one of those two topics.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to report? Alder Pro?
Couple things. Commission on Aging met this week and looked at some initial numbers of use of the senior center, which has gone up a lot over the last few years, especially after pandemic, but even last year compared to the previous year. And this tied in a little bit with the community campus stuff too, just how popular the Middleton Senior Center is and the programs that they're doing there and the number of people that show up to use the center. So good news, but we need room to do stuff too. Otherwise we have to turn people away. So the other thing is with library board, we're looking at April 12th as kind of the rollout of the bookmobile over at the library or the parking lot behind the library across the railroad tracks. We haven't quite figured out all of those logistics, but it's in possession of the city right now. And there's some work that's being done. We don't really want it out on the icy streets, snowy streets at this time of year either. So a little bit of work that needs to be done. Staff needs to be trained. Then the library has to load it all up with books. So that'll take a little bit of time as well. But April 12th is the goal, is to have it out for a public showing
Wonderful.
at that point.
That's exciting. Anybody else? All right. That is the end of our agenda. This meeting is adjourned.